The irony of trading is that the vast majority of people who enter this arena are defeated long before they risk a single dollar, long before they even open a chart, and certainly long before the market has any opportunity to teach them anything meaningful. We speak often about the statistic that 90% of traders fail, and we tend to attribute this failure to poor risk management, inadequate strategies, or emotional weakness in the heat of battle. But these are merely symptoms. The true pathology runs far deeper, embedded in the very substrate of how aspiring traders conceptualize what trading actually is, what it demands, and who they must become to succeed. The failure begins in the mind, in the silent assumptions and invisible frameworks that shape perception before a single trade is ever placed. It begins in the profound and largely unconscious misalignment between the trader's internal model of reality and the actual nature of the game they are attempting to play. Consider for a moment the journey that brings someone to trading. In nearly every other domain of human achievement, there exists a relatively clear correspondence between effort and outcome, between skill acquisition and predictable results. If you study mathematics diligently, you will solve increasingly complex problems. If you practice a musical instrument with discipline, you will play with greater proficiency. If you train your body systematically, you will become stronger, faster, more capable. The world rewards this linear progression, and our educational systems are built entirely upon this foundation. We are conditioned from our earliest years to believe that competence leads to success, that knowledge translates to control, and that the universe operates according to rules that, once understood, can be leveraged to produce desired outcomes. This is the bedrock assumption of the achiever's mindset, and it is precisely this assumption that makes trading so psychologically treacherous. Trading exists in a fundamentally different ontological category. It is a domain of irreducible uncertainty, where the relationship between action and outcome is probabilistic rather than deterministic, where being right offers no guarantee of profit, and being wrong does not necessarily result in loss. The market does not care about your analysis, your preparation, or your deservingness. It is not a test to be passed or a problem to be solved. It is a complex, adaptive system, a living ecology of human behavior, capital flows, and emergent phenomena that cannot be conquered through force of will or intellectual superiority. Yet the aspiring trader arrives at this arena carrying the psychological toolkit that served them well in every previous endeavor, wholly unaware that these very tools will become instruments of their undoing. The first and most insidious error occurs in the realm of identity and self-concept. Most people approach trading as a performance arena, a place to demonstrate competence and validate their intelligence. They carry with them an implicit narrative. I am smart, I am capable. I have succeeded in other difficult domains. Therefore, I will succeed here. This identity, forged through years of academic achievement or professional success, becomes a terrible liability. Because trading, in its essence, is not about being right. It is about managing uncertainty, embracing ambiguity, and maintaining equanimity in the face of randomness. The very ego structure that propelled someone to excellence in conventional domains becomes a rigid prison in trading, because it cannot tolerate the fundamental truth that no amount of intelligence or effort can eliminate the possibility of being wrong. The trader who needs to be right, who needs each trade to validate their competence, has already failed. They have entered a probabilistic game with a deterministic mindset, and this category error will express itself in 1,000 subtle ways that undermine their edge before they even realize they are sabotaging themselves. This misalignment manifests most clearly in how aspiring traders relate to information and knowledge. They consume vast quantities of content, devouring books, courses, videos, and strategies with voracious appetite. They believe, often unconsciously, that sufficient information will provide certainty, that if they can just find the right indicator, the perfect pattern, the secret insight that others have missed, they will gain an advantage that makes success inevitable. This is the fantasy of control masquerading as education. What they fail to recognize is that trading is not fundamentally an information problem. Every profitable pattern is known. Every technical principle has been documented. The knowledge is freely available, democratized to a degree unprecedented in human history. Yet still, 90% fail. This should be a clue that the bottleneck is not informational but psychological. The trader who has not yet placed a trade but is already drowning in information, jumping from strategy to strategy, seeking the holy grail in the next course or the next guru, has already demonstrated the very psychological pattern that will destroy them in live markets. They are externalizing the source of their future success, looking outside themselves for something that can only be built from within. Closely related to this is the catastrophic misunderstanding of what constitutes edge in trading. The novice believes that edge is found in superior analysis, in seeing what others miss, in predicting market movements with greater accuracy. They study chart patterns and economic indicators, convinced that if they can just interpret these signals correctly, profits will follow. But this represents a fundamental confusion about causality. Edge in trading is not primarily analytical. It is behavioral. It lies not in knowing what will happen, but in knowing yourself well enough to execute your process consistently, regardless of what happens. The greatest analysts in the world fail as traders if they cannot manage their emotional responses, if they cannot sit with discomfort, if they cannot honor their risk parameters when every fiber of their being wants to hold a losing position or take profits prematurely. The trader who has not yet encountered their own psychology under pressure, who has not yet discovered the vast gap between intellectual understanding and embodied execution, is operating under a delusion that will be ruthlessly exposed by the market. There is also the matter of time frame and expectation, which reveals another dimension of pre-failure. Our culture has become increasingly oriented toward rapid gratification, toward hacks and shortcuts and accelerated paths to mastery. This cultural current runs directly counter to what trading actually requires. The aspiring trader typically arrives with an implicit timeline, a hidden expectation about how quickly they should achieve profitability. Perhaps they have quit a job, or invested savings they cannot afford to lose, or simply set an arbitrary deadline based on nothing more than impatience. They do not recognize that trading mastery is measured in years, not months, and that the path to consistency involves so many psychological deaths and rebirths that most people will abandon the journey long before they reach anything resembling sustainable success. The failure is baked in through this temporal misalignment. They are not prepared for the duration of the apprenticeship, for the years of making the same mistakes in different forms, for the slow and often painful process of rewiring neural pathways that were optimized for a completely different kind of environment. Before they place a trade, they have already set themselves up for abandonment by holding expectations that are fundamentally incompatible with the actual developmental trajectory that mastery requires. Underneath all of these specific errors lies a more profound philosophical confusion about the nature of causation and control. Most human endeavors exist in domains where our actions have relatively direct consequences, where cause and effect are tightly coupled, where we can troubleshoot failure by identifying what we did wrong and correcting it. Trading offers no such comfort. You can execute a trade with perfect technical and psychological discipline, honoring every principle of sound risk management, and still lose money. Conversely, you can enter a position for terrible reasons, violate every rule in your playbook, and make a fortune. This decoupling of quality from outcome is psychologically intolerable for most people. It violates the just world hypothesis that is hardwired into human cognition, the belief that good actions lead to good results and bad actions lead to bad results. The trader who has not yet grappled with this existential reality, who has not yet made peace with the fact that they are playing a game where short-term results are largely random and only long-term statistical patterns reveal anything about skill, is already primed for failure. They will inevitably fall into the trap of results-oriented thinking, judging their decisions by outcomes rather than process, and this alone will guarantee their destruction. What we are really discussing here is a crisis of meaning-making. Human beings are meaning-making machines. We cannot help but construct narratives, identify patterns, and impose order on chaos. This capacity has served our species extraordinarily well throughout evolutionary history. But in trading, this same capacity becomes a curse. The trader looks at a chart and sees patterns that feel meaningful, that seem to predict future movement, and they do not recognize that much of what they perceive is simply the brain's pattern recognition machinery, generating false signals from noise. They experience a string of losses and construct a narrative about what went wrong, never considering that randomness requires no explanation. That variance is not a puzzle to be solved, but a fundamental feature of probabilistic systems. The trader who has not yet developed the cognitive sophistication to distinguish between genuine signal and illusory pattern, between bad luck and bad process, between meaningful feedback and meaningless noise, is already operating at a profound disadvantage. They will spend their energy solving the wrong problems, fighting battles that do not need to be fought, and missing entirely the actual work that needs to be done. Perhaps most tragically, there is the dimension of self-awareness and psychological honesty. Trading is a mirror. It reflects back to you, with ruthless precision, every unexamined belief, every hidden fear, every character flaw you have managed to hide or compensate for in other areas of life. The market will find your weaknesses and exploit them systematically. It will trigger your deepest insecurities, activate your most primitive survival responses, and drag into consciousness every unresolved psychological conflict you carry. The trader who has not yet done the interior work, who has not yet cultivated genuine self-awareness, who has not yet learned to observe their own mental and emotional states with detachment, is walking into an arena that will destroy them psychologically. And the crucial point is this: none of this becomes apparent until you are actually trading with meaningful capital. You can paper trade for years and learn nothing about yourself. You can study psychology intellectually and remain completely blind to your own patterns. The real work cannot begin until you are in the fire, and most people are simply not prepared for how hot that fire burns. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that trading attracts a particular personality type, individuals who are often high-achieving, intelligent, and accustomed to success. These are people who have learned to trust their intellect, to rely on analysis, to believe that effort and intelligence are sufficient to overcome any obstacle. Trading systematically undermines all of these adaptive strategies. It punishes overthinking, rewards simplicity, and demands a kind of surrender that feels like weakness to the achiever's mind. The very qualities that brought someone to trading, the confidence and ambition and belief in their own capabilities, become the primary obstacles to success. They must undergo a complete psychological metamorphosis, must die to their old identity, and be reborn as something entirely different. And most people are simply not willing to endure this transformation. They would rather fail and preserve their self-concept than succeed and discover they are not who they thought they were. So when we say that 90% of traders fail before they even place a trade, we are pointing to this vast invisible landscape of psychological and philosophical errors that precede market engagement. We are identifying the profound mismatch between who the aspiring trader is and who they would need to become. We are recognizing that the real challenge of trading is not technical but existential, not about finding the right strategy, but about fundamentally restructuring one's relationship to uncertainty, control, ego, and meaning. The market does not defeat most traders. They defeat themselves through the invisible frameworks they bring to the arena, through assumptions so deep they do not even recognize them as assumptions, through expectations that guarantee disappointment and psychological patterns that guarantee self-sabotage. The failure is over before it begins. Not because these individuals lack intelligence or potential, but because they are attempting to play a game they do not yet understand at a level far deeper than strategy or technique. Until this fundamental misalignment is addressed, until the aspiring trader recognizes that the real work is interior rather than exterior, psychological rather than technical, all the education and analysis in the world will be nothing more than rearranging deck chairs on a ship that is already sinking beneath the waves.